Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Derek Main and I review translated literature. Before we jump into the review today, for those content creators and vloggers and booktubers that follow me, I've been using QuickTime to record my movies, and I'm going to start today trying to use iMovie to edit because QuickTime just kind of stops recording at some point and I can't figure out why. Well, if anybody uses something other than QuickTime to record their vlogs, if they would put that down in the comments, that would be a big help to me. I'm not very technologically savvy, so I use an external webcam to make it look a little better than my Mac thing, and then I use a blue little microphone, hopefully to make my voice sound a little crisper and clearer as well. So I just connect those two things up. I go to QuickTime, I press record, and here we are. But I'm thinking I may be missing something that would make this easier for me and also the quality better. So that out of the way, my name is Derek Main. I review translated literature. Today's review is Professor Andersen's Night by Dag Solstad. This is translated by Agnes Scott Langeland, and it is a New Directions paperback. So, interesting story on how I came across this book. I went to a bookstore that I had been wanting to go to for quite a while. I go to Charleston, South Carolina for work a lot, and I had read about a bookmobile that was there called the Itinerant Literate. And so I went to visit it, and apparently the bookmobile, due to some regulation stuff, hasn't quite worked out. So now they have a little small permanent space. I went in, it's super cute and adorable, the little cat walking around, very cozy. Not a big selection of anything because it's a small space. But they had a small translated fiction section. I think every title there was New Directions. I think there was maybe 6 or 7, and there was only 2 that I hadn't read. One was The Factory, which I reviewed, and I think ended up either 4th, 5th maybe in my best books of last year, so that was a great find. And this was the other one. I had never heard of it. I had never heard of the author. So I just picked it up because I wanted to get something. So I decided to read it on Christmas Eve because it takes place on Christmas Eve. So quick plot summary. Professor Andersen is a professor of literature in, I think it's Norway, in Norway. And he lives alone. He is clearly a member sort of the upper crust, so a little different than the way we think of professors probably here in America. I don't know about other countries, but he seems to be moneyed. He seems to do quite well and has a high esteem, a high respect within the community. I'm not saying that doesn't exist here in America, but the money part, he seems kind of rich. So he is alone on Christmas Eve. He has prepared himself this big feast, even though he's not religious. He likes the ritual of it all. And as he's sitting down, I think after for cognac and coffee, he witnesses a murder. And this on the back page, front page. I'm not going to give away any spoilers. Frankly, there's not much to spoil. But he witnesses a murder. And then the rest of the book is him deciding whether or not he is going to report the murder. Okay, so that's the book. Pretty good setup. I like it. I like murder mysteries. I like the moral quandary. I argue there's not much of one, but fine. We'll go into a moral quandary to see what kind of morality and ethics we'll be dealing with. This is going to be my most negative review of any book that I've put up yet. And I decided to go ahead and review it because it brought about some interesting questions about the things that I didn't like about it. I thought brought about some interesting conversations. So I can't recommend this book. There might be some readers that would find this very good. Certainly the writing is fine. The translation seems great. You heard what the conceit was. Well, let's start with the writing, though. So it is very stuffy. Despite the fact that this is in contemporary times, I think, maybe turn of the century or 2004 or something like that, but contemporary modern times, it is written as if it is 1895, and done so on purpose. So the writing and even sort of the character, the stuffiness of the prose, it is very excruciating to get through. I do not enjoy it. I think that it is on purpose. I think that it is part of the character, the sort of stuffy academic that we are looking at, and how he views the world as maybe trapped in this time. There's definitely elements later on when he's discussing his work in literature. He is an expert in, I forget the name of the author. It's who wrote The Dollhouse. It's a playwright. And I'm not going to go through to find it, but he's an expert in this one very famous playwright that was at the turn of the other century, back where I think the writing kind of belongs and lives and should have stayed there. But because of that, he kind of writes and thinks in those ways, but he questions his own commitment to studying this one writer, kind of trying to decide, okay, I've spent my whole life doing this, but is this writer even worth remembering 100 years from now? So, I guess that's sort of interesting from a literary criticism standpoint, and also from the idea of what are the things, what are the writers, what are the stories that we teach in schools in 100 years? What are the things that become literary canon? What are the things that sort of are the building blocks for the next movement? And, so that's somewhat interesting. But so that, I think, is why we have the stuffy writing, because it's playing into that, to his interests and to his professional work and to who he is as a person. The problem is, I think that this might work if it were a satire, but it's not funny. And for a satire to work, I think it has to be funny. Otherwise, the genuineness of which that we see as we read it kind of just makes us hate the character, hate the themes of the writing, and hate the ultimate truths and morality that come out of it. There are pages and pages of Professor Andersen going back and forth if he should report this. Of course he should report it. What's the other side of the moral tale? Well, there isn't one. So, we are invited to wonder why he didn't report it. And through this, we open up to what I think is the overall thematic quality of the book, and it's actually political. Because he is going to visit with other professors of different disciplines, and he's never going to tell them because he wants to, but he racks his brain, and we've got to go back and forth with the same paragraphs over and over about, are we going to do it or not? But what we learn is, within this upper crust sort of academic stuffy society, we have the equivalent of today's modern day American liberals, okay? Which means, for the purposes of what I'm talking about, and I'm using a lot of shorthand, so please don't be offended with that. There's a lot of people that I love, my wife, a lot of people in my family that would identify as a liberal, so I'm using it in a different context, let's say, okay? And I am, if you've watched my channel, I am fairly far left, particularly for America. So, one example to get me right at what I want to talk about. One of his friends, the professors, is considered an activist, okay? And Professor Andersen has always been very in awe of his activism. Well, his activism has to do with wearing a button that says that he doesn't think we should have nuclear arms. A button, as he walks around. That's his show of activism. Professor Andersen is so ineffectual that while he agrees with the sentiment, he does not want to upset any apple carts by having an overtly political statement. Well, it's amongst his students and the community at large. What would they think if he had an opinion and a point of view? So he takes one of these buttons and he puts them on his nightstand or clothes. He puts it in on top of a drawer in his room. I forget exactly what piece of furniture it is. It doesn't matter. He hides it away, right? Because he supports it, but to wear it would be... That's what I mean by the liberal thing, right? Because it is believing certain things are a truth and a moral right and a moral good, but not having any courage to risk anything of your own to fight against them or for something. Now, I think this is the thematic quality, at least for me, that springs out about the book. And there are lots of segments in here where it's pretty open that Professor Andersen understands that he is a beneficiary of the politics that he disagrees with from a philosophical point of view. He disagrees with them philosophically, he disagrees with them ethically, but he personally benefits. So, this is what I mean by the liberal thing, because here in America, and I'm assuming in the Western world, there are a lot of people that philosophically oppose our imperialism, or philosophically oppose the way that we trounce on minorities of every stripe and type, and the free labor that we continuously throughout history, at least in America, starting with the fact that we stole people and enslaved them from Africa, and then afterwards set up draconian laws to make sure that they would work for our benefit even after they were free, while we reaped the benefits of their labor. And at no point in history ever have we acknowledged that these people built up our wealth or given back anything or ever tried to level the playing field as a reciprocity for what they were able to do for this country, right? And that continues on today. And then in other ways, in our immigration debate today, we want this very cheap labor to come from southern countries, from America, right? We want that to come in, and we don't want any businesses to be in any sort of trouble for illegally hiring these or whatever. But what we do want to punish when we can are the actual individuals providing that labor, okay? Especially when our labor force itself becomes tight. So whenever it becomes tight, if a Appalachian rural sort of poor white guy can't find work, despite the fact he doesn't want to do the work at the chicken farm, but if he can't find work, then our new political boogeyman will be our neighbors to the south. And we've been seeing that, of course, for the last 4 years and much, much longer than that. Okay? Now, as a white man who is of the professional class, I philosophically and ethically oppose this. But it benefits me, because the entire system is set up to benefit me, to benefit someone with the color of my skin, to benefit someone with my sexuality, being a heterosexual, to benefit someone with my gender, being a male, to benefit someone that just had the blind luck to be born in 1982 in this specific country that was built specifically for me to prosper. Will I or anyone give up any of the privilege that we have to make our ideals, right, try to become reality? That is a question that I have to wrestle with, and many, many others like me have to wrestle with. And I think that's what this is about. But Professor Andersen is not wrestling with it. Because, and this is a spoiler, but I do not recommend this book. And if you want to read it, okay. But I think you can figure out, based off of the conception of the book, that he's not going to report the murder. He's not going to report it to his friends. He's not going to report it to the police. He is going to leave it up here, racked in his brain, something to tear him apart, something to intellectualize, something to wrestle with, something to have internal conversations about, but no action. This is dangerous. It's happening today. It's happening for the past 50, 60 years, it is happening to Professor Andersen. So, for that reason, it was hard to read. It was hard to read because it hits close to home. And you might be saying, well, then that sounds like a good, effective book. Perhaps. But, one, it's a concept I'm very familiar with and we can see throughout the news every day. It's honestly not what I'm looking for in my literature. Two, it's not a great book. It's not funny, so we can't satirize it, right? It doesn't come across as satire. Instead, it comes across as this laboring, non-stop, one man's just grinding through all of these different permutations of morality in his head without ever doing anything about it. And we know from the first page that he's not going to do anything about it. Because the book should be 3 pages long. He should see the murder. He should report it. And then if we want to tell a story of the aftermath and stuff, we have a story. But we don't have a story. What we have is a history of privileged people in the Western world. Is this fair on my part? No. It's not fair to the author. It's not fair to the translator. And it's not fair to the publisher. This hits at what is sometimes difficult about reading literature in translation. Because I am bringing too much of my own issues, my own beliefs, my own worldview into reading this particular book. Because I'm seeing a book written by a Western European man. I'm going to admit that the fact that Peter Handke is on the back, along with Karl Navsgaard, exalting this author plays a role, okay? So I'm bringing that baggage into it. But he is writing it, and even if he is making a statement decrying it, that doesn't necessarily come through, again, because there's no sort of hints at a point of view outside of Professor Andersen's. And Professor Andersen's point of view is awful, at least to me. It's a reminder to me that I need to do more in my own life, particularly this year as we hit 2020, and there are some actionable things that we hopefully can do. It will be soon time, due to the events in Iran, for me to get back out into the marches for the anti-war, just as we did years ago in Iraq. And while none of those were successful, you still add your voice to the chorus of saying, I reject this. But even that is ineffectual and not much action. So that part of the book is somewhat interesting to me with the philosophy that at least I took out of it. Another reader might read this and say, okay, I saw hints of this here and there, but really it's a pretty straightforward murder mystery. You're bringing way too much of your own stuff into this. Well, that's okay. I'm a reader. Once you put something out into the world, it belongs to the readers. And this reader is taking that from it and rejecting it, and wondering if he himself can do anything to be less complicit. Okay, so I didn't like the book, but I got a little something out of it. It got me a little heated. It got me thinking. The writing of this book is so incredibly stuffy and so incredibly boring to read. I don't understand why a book like this becomes some sort of canon for literature and translation. I don't understand why this story is one that we exalt and put on big publishers, the largest literature and translation publisher in America. And I mean, New Directions, I have 100 New Direction books here. I love New Directions, but of course not all are going to be hits. But why? Why this story? Why this point of view? I want to read from marginalized people that are actually in it, people whose lives are actually affected, not someone in this ivory tower, a phrase I hate, but stuffy academia rich who is just looking out upon the world and saying, well, that seems disagreeable, but I'll put my button up on the shelf saying I think it's disagreeable and never, ever do anything about it. Sorry, my computer just right during my little speech. I don't know. Sometimes you pick out the wrong books, you know. I'll just finish with this about the wrong books. I've been noticing lately, man, booktubers are so good about like keeping spreadsheets of all the books they've ever read and having a TBR pile, both physical and online, where they have another spreadsheet of this is all I want to read. And I'm so bad at that. I just pick up these books and I go through them. I never don't finish. And I think I'm always, now that I'm doing this channel, probably going to comment on most of them. And in some ways, I wish I could have just put this down after 10, 15 pages and not been annoyed and gone to one of the many other wonderful stories and books here that I'm ready to open. But for some reason, I just can't. It's like a personality flaw or something. I'm not organized with what I read, and I kind of just go with it. This happened to be, like I said, I wanted to read on Christmas Eve, and I thought that was a good idea. And Christmas Eve is a time where after the kids go to bed and my wife goes to bed and the presents are all down there, I like to sit down and have candles and incense on right by the tree and sit and read quietly. And I did this one this year and came away annoyed. That'll happen. You got to sift through a lot of stuff that isn't for you to ultimately find things that just absolutely, my next review is going to be Back to the Good Stuff. Ricardo Piglia, Target in the Night, translated from the Spanish by Sergio Weisman from Deep Vellum Books. This showed up on a list of best literature and translation in the past 10 years. I'm going to talk more about this, but you got to read some of these sometimes to find some of these. I'm really excited about reviewing this book. I've got a ton of notes and highlights, and so I'll be back in a better mood and much fresher and happier. Let me know what you think. If you've read this book, I'd like to know your comments. If you want me to review books that I do not like in this way, let me know. And if you don't, let me know that as well. Let me know and say, Derek, I think you should skip those. If it's going to end up being just like you ranting about things that you personally are worried about as opposed to really delving into the book, just skip that one and move to the next. Let me know what you think. I'm just trying to figure this thing out. As you know, I don't even seem to have the software down. But I'm trying, and I really appreciate you guys being here. So until next time, be good to folks.